Well, welcome back into the mid-Norfolk cottage garden, and our job for today is repotting these holly bushes, these standard bushes that we've had either side of the back cottage door now for around 4.5–5 years. And what's happened to these containers that they're in, you can see they've completely corroded away. So we're replacing these with two more modern reproduction equivalents. Managed to source something very similar. I've no doubt that these aren't original 20th or 19th century pieces. These are modern, made in China, made to look galvanized, but I don't believe for 1 second these are going to last any longer than what we've had these big hollies in. But they've grown very well in these containers, and they certainly give the look for a relatively low cost. So my challenge today is to try and get this holly bush out of this container, which is disintegrating, and potted into these. Now, one thing I have noticed with them is the drainage holes. There is one very tiny central drainage hole, no more than about 6 mil in diameter in that, which I think, looking at this, is totally inadequate. So the first job is to get a drill out and to pop a few additional holes in the base of each of these, and then I'm going to give them a really good amount of drainage with some old crocks, which I've got here, because the last thing you want with these containers and these rather large plants is for it to be waterlogged. And by having a good amount of compost but well drained, you should allow for some healthy growth, which is what you need for a plant this size. And these have flowered and fruited very well over the last 5 years. We've kept them pruned quite nicely into a ball at the top on a single clear stem. They do have some rather nice red berries each year. I'm not entirely certain on the variety. It's a variegated holly, no thorns on it at all, so that will probably narrow it down. And we also managed to put Christmas lights in these every year, so I'm keen to keep them looking as good as they are now and in this condition. And part of that is making sure that the compost that they're growing in doesn't dry out from being exposed at the sides. You can already see some of the roots coming through there and the damage that's occurring to those from being exposed to the sun and drying effects of the air. Now I'm going to start by working around the tops of these and trying to loosen quite a bit of this compost. Because these are bulbous, these containers, I'm not sure how easily these are going to lift out of here. The root ball is pretty fibrous all the way through. I can feel that. Look at all this root on the surface. So I'm thinking maybe what I'm going to have to do, these aren't obviously going to be used again, and I'm thinking maybe I'm going to have to cut through these and actually remove them physically rather than lifting out. But let's just have a go and see what happens. Well, this one's rather conveniently broken right in two. I've now got the decision as to whether I try cutting through this, and the top part's still in quite sound condition, so it's going to be a bit of a job, or whether I just try lifting it right off over the canopy, which I think is going to be the easiest route. None of these laterals are too thick. I think the easiest job's just going to be lifting that right up and over. Let's give that a go. I think I'm going to have to put the camera down for this. And there we go, lifted off the top very nicely. No damage to the actual canopy, it all fed up and through that really well, which has left me with the root ball exposed quite nicely. You see, when they've potted this up, they've done so with quite a bit of polystyrene in the base. Not sure whether that's been used just to reduce the amount of compost they've had to use, or as the actual drainage layer in the base of here. I think it's probably been used to produce a drainage layer. I'm probably going to pick that off and go with my original crocks in the base of this. I may have to just pare some of this compost off the side to actually get it through the diameter of the upper rim of these containers. So let's see how that goes. Well, the metal base on this container is completely corroded away, but the roots have gone all the way through it, and a lot of this polystyrene material that's been put into the original planter, I've decided I'm going to have to remove the majority of this, because there's no way I'm going to be able to backfill this effectively with all this root coming through it, I'm going to end up with masses of air pockets if I were to do that. So I'm going to try and remove as much of this material as I possibly can, and as much of the polystyrene material with it. And if I have to lose some of this root, so be it, but it's better to do that and get a flat bottom that you can place into some fresh compost in one of these containers than risk massive air pockets on the base of this plant, which really is a bizarre planting technique. I'm sure looking at this, there's far more than you'd use just for producing drainage. This has been used as a cost-saving measure. Get rid of some of that waste off the nursery and reduce the amount of compost that you have to put in these planters when it was sold as a planted container. It shows you're never quite sure what you're buying until you start taking things apart. Look at all that polystyrene doing this plant absolutely no good whatsoever. And just reducing the amount of nutrients available for it. And I'll end up with a considerably smaller root ball than I was expecting, but all good, because fresh compost can come in here and that will make for a good start for this plant when I've got it into this new container. Well, all the polystyrene has now been removed from the base of this plant and I'm left with a much shorter ball of compost. But just look at this, I've got a diameter problem here, and it's quite a common problem, particularly with these bulbous middled planters of this design, where it's just too wide to go in to the container. So what I'm going to have to do with this is just gradually start working away around the circumference with your fingers, exposing some of this root and removing some of this fibrous, dense, old spent compost. Now this will actually, at this time of year, do the plant very little harm and encourage it into new growth of fresh young roots into the new compost. So I'm just going to rotate this round and continue that process to expose these roots and reduce the circumference of this root ball so I can fit it into this new container and give me an adequate space around the circumference to feed fresh compost down and avoid leaving any new air pockets. And here we have the root ball now worked so that it fits rather snugly around the top, but I've got enough space around the periphery to start feeding some of this compost down the side. And what I'll do is just rock it gently while I'm feeding compost into that area. It'll take a bit of working down, but this is quite a loose fibrous compost that we've got here, and I think if you can see that, it's going to go down quite easily. Don't want to plant more of that polystyrene. And I'm going to top dress this and just bring the compost up to about this level. So I'm just going to continue to feed that until the root ball is completely nice and firm and well supported, and keep checking your uprights here to make sure that you're not planting it in the container on a silly angle that's going to annoy you and you're going to have to replant. So I'll keep doing that now, we'll see how we get on. We have a little trick for when you're working compost down the side of a really narrow gap like this, is just to have a piece of dowling or cane that you can just compress it down and keep working your way right the way down. You'll feel when it suddenly goes down where you've got the air pockets, and just keep feeding fresh compost into those areas until it feels really firm all the way round. And you'll find when you've completed that, you should have quite a firm planting of the tree and it shouldn't rock around like that. And here we have the finished planted tree. You can hear that moving around the container rather than moving around within the compost, nice and firm. I've really got this well compressed down. I'm happy that we're now going to move that into its final position and then really water it well. All those roots that you've exposed and have been exposed to the air, you're really going to need to saturate, and then we'll start feeding this as well and get it coming into growth this time of year. Middle of April going into May should really start to put some fresh root growth on, and it will completely anchor itself into that pot very, very quickly, just as it was in the old ones. So one down, one to go. Let's hope the next one goes just as easily.